Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Lindsey Davis-Stover. We have a great show this evening. I am so excited to welcome our two guests. First, Melissa Bryant, U.S. Army veteran and fierce advocate. And second, we have Kayla Williams, U.S. Army veteran and author. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you
Kayla,
so much for having us.
Yes, I'm not sure if you can see, but I actually have your book right behind me. So it is a well-traveled book. And those of you that have not read it, she actually is an author of two books, Love My Rifle More Than You and Plenty of Time When We Get Home. So I am so thrilled to have both of you with us this evening. And we are less than 30 days out from the election. Melissa, can you just set the stage for us and talk to us a little bit about what's at stake right now?
I think we all took that collective deep breath as you stated that question. It is a loaded question. I'm feeling cautiously optimistic. I firmly believe that a Biden-Harris administration is what we need in order to right a lot of what's been happening within the national security space in particular. I'll kind of frame it within that as grounding for this conversation. We've had many national security leaders for Biden, to include Kayla, who have been coming out on a daily basis and speaking about how a Biden-Harris administration is really going to put us back on the right path with our allies, with our security posture. And then let's break it down even further for those vulnerable veteran populations, women, minorities, all of us. We've been feeling the pain of 2020 especially. So it's oh so critical right now in these last days. And I know I'm doing everything I can to get out the vote. I know Kayla's doing everything she can to get out the vote, and especially the veteran vote, because we are 1% of the population. We know that the military is the most trusted institution within our U.S. government. And yet there's been fissures that have been created by the Trump administration. And hopefully we can repair those with our next administration coming forward. So that's kind of where I level set for looking forward for the next 28 days.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so much at stake. Kayla, can you speak to that as well?
It feels to me like our democracy is on the line. It feels like such a threatening moment. I look back to the time that I spent in Iraq when I saw convoys of armed men driving around, and never dreamed that I would see a visual like that here in our country, but we have. And our standing internationally is threatened. We have shattered alliances. We have become in some ways a laughingstock for our complete inability to handle the coronavirus pandemic. There are so many areas in which the functioning of our country internally and internationally is at risk right now if we cannot elect Joe Biden and get back on track with a functional and smooth running, effective government. Domestic policies like healthcare, also a huge concern. The Affordable Care Act is at risk. People with pre-existing conditions may not be able to get health care in the future. I donated a kidney to a stranger. That means that I would count in that group as somebody who has a pre-existing condition forever. That's terrifying, that I might be punished for doing something to help someone else if this goes forward. In addition, as Melissa stated, there are a lot of things that are specifically and particularly important to me as a veteran, and also to me as with both of you, I think, as moms, right? I mean, we're doing this from our own homes because we can't be in the studio because it's not safe. And if you're like me, your kids are in another room somewhere under strict orders to please be silent so we can film this. And I would really love to get back to an environment where things are safe, The pandemic is under control. My kids can go to school. I can go back into the office, and we can find a new normal where Americans are once again able to work, grow, live, thrive, love the person that they love without worrying about their right to marriage being stripped away, and so many other aspects of our daily lives.
Absolutely. And if I could just dovetail on that very quickly, Lindsey, I would be remiss if I didn't mention as a Black woman what the personal fear that I've felt. I felt it on November 9th of 2016, frankly. I remember posting on my Facebook page the sleeping beast that had been awakened by Donald Trump. I grew up in Philly. I've known Donald Trump my whole life. Anyone who's lived on the I-95 corridor has known Donald Trump their whole life. And I knew what was coming. And my parents knew, my grandparents knew, and it's deeply terrifying to see that in 2020, even for myself, I've faced overt racism within the national security apparatus, within some of our veteran service organizations, which are meant to help each other. You hear common phrases like "we all bleed green," and that's not necessarily the case, especially as we learn of the plot out in Michigan by domestic terrorists, let's not call them militia, to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And that's something that we've become all too familiar with within the military, because we know that white supremacists are joining our ranks to receive critical training so that they can carry out plots like this. And so I'm scared. I'm scared existentially for our republic, and then personally for myself and my family.
Absolutely. I mean, what the two of you have so beautifully laid out, I mean, it just puts a pit in your stomach when you realize what's at stake, right? And we hear every 4 years, and here in Virginia, sometimes we hear every year because we have elections every year, this is the most important election of our lifetime. But for all of the many reasons that the two of you just laid out, this one really is the most important election of our lifetime. And that is why I am so grateful to have the two of you on today. And I know that the work you're doing every single day to advocate on behalf of veterans and to ensure that we have strong policies in place to care for all of those who have served, and also to ensure that we have the right leaders in place. I couldn't be more grateful to you both for the work that you're doing. One of the many hats that the two of you are wearing right now is you are members of the Women Veterans Council for Biden. Kayla, can you tell us a little bit about the council? And Melissa, I'd love to hear more about the activities and the work that you're doing on the council.
So it's really a grassroots initiated effort. Ginger Miller of Women Veterans Interactive is one of the key figures who is leading this effort. And it's gotten support from the official campaign itself to host a series of events to help talk about the issues that are most important for women veterans with other women veterans. And I have never seen another campaign that was willing to invest specifically in talking about the issues that matter to what amounts to a relatively small subpopulation. Women are only about 10% of veterans, and veterans are a pretty small minority of the US population. And it really shows me the extent to which this campaign cares about people. They're willing to listen when folks came forward and said, hey, our population has some specific challenges and we want to talk about them. And the Biden-Harris campaign said, absolutely, let's get down to it. Let's talk about it and figure out how we can mobilize and activate your important constituency, and also make sure that the campaign knows what issues you're most concerned about so that when they take office, they can tackle them.
I love the Women Veterans Council within the campaign for all the reasons that Kayla stated. When we come from the military, we learn how to build coalitions of the willing, and being able to apply that skill set to politics and being able to apply that across the board for all the many coalitions for Biden, for women, for veterans, for women veterans, for Black women veterans. And like, we can just go down each subgroup as it is. And that's not even scratching the surface of how many we are impacting. Everyone has a voice and a story. And what I love about the work that we've been doing within the Women Veterans Council is that we've been bringing together LGBTQ, minority veterans. We've been bringing together or bringing light to the issue of military sexual trauma, which is an umbrella that encompasses assault and harassment, all covered under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is not akin to civilian justice, as many may not be familiar with. But this summer, amongst all the other things of 2020 that became big, was the issue of military sexual assault and trauma under the case of Vanessa Guillen, a specialist who was killed out at Fort Hood. Her death and legacy, or tragic murder and legacy, have galvanized another grassroots movement within a grassroots movement. And I love seeing all these coalitions converge. And I'm proud to be a part of these coalitions that are, one, standing up and saying no more. As women, as veterans, as minorities, we're standing up and saying, we're not going to take this anymore. And veterans are in a unique position to be able to speak to that because we know what it's like to do the right thing even when no one's watching. That's why you're seeing the odds between the military and national security leaders and what's happened within the Trump administration and how reckless they've been. This is why we're all speaking out so fervently and vociferously now, because we know when to do the right thing even when no one's looking. And that's something that this administration has eschewed from day one. And all of these issues are now coming to a head just within a month of the election. And I truly believe that within the Women Veterans Council, within all the coalitions that are pulling for Biden and Harris, we will overcome, because it's all about the people. And that's what this all is. I mean, the military is just a microcosm of the people. And hopefully the work that Kayla and I continue to do will elevate those voices.
That's phenomenal. Again, thank you both for the incredible work you're doing, because it is so important. And one of the things I really want to draw upon is taking a look back, and I hate to do this to bring us all the way back to 2016, but I do want to kind of talk about how, in many ways, how far we've come to. In 2016, Trump won the margin pretty handedly among veterans and getting the veterans vote. Can you talk a little bit about if things have changed since then or not? And also talk a bit, Melissa, about what issues are most important to veterans when they go to the polls, especially this November?
I'll start with the latter question first in terms of what is most important to veterans. By and large, veterans are not a monolith. So let's start there. I think that has to ground any question. It was largely held that veterans were a conservative bunch. And even in 2016, 7 out of 10, I believe, voted for Trump. And that's changing. And I think it's changing not so much that there's, it's more so changing in the sense that folks like me and Kayla, frankly, well, Kayla's always been out front. I just left government 5 years ago, and so I couldn't be as vocal thanks to the Hatch Act. But amongst the conversations with my friends and peers, it seemed taboo to be a liberal and to be in uniform. And hopefully that's something that is changing from 2016, because veterans are not a monolith. There is a huge push within alliances, political action groups, and others who are now recognizing that there is nuance to our service, and there's nuance to the lens in which we view national security. For example, LGBTQ and the trans ban, which Trump basically decreed by tweet. I think that was one of his first major policies by tweet back in 2017 when he repealed transgender service within the military. And in doing that, first he sent DOD in a scramble, which they had to finally back up what he said. And then secondly, it impacted recruiting and retention, because not only were you putting those who are currently serving, who were told within the years prior that they were safe and that they will be given the treatment that they need and that they could serve, but you're putting their careers in jeopardy. And then you're also impacting recruiting, because Generation Z that we're looking to recruit right now will not stand for this. They will not stand for that attack on love is love and basic identity. And so in understanding that, I think that it's hard to say of what's of what's the same, actually. I think what's changed is that folks have all come out of the proverbial closet, so to speak. Whether you're LGBTQ or just a liberal, I feel like I've come out of the closet since 2016. People who personally knew my politics knew me, but I just don't care anymore because I think our republic's under existential threat when we don't speak about these issues loudly and speak about the atrocities within the Trump administration in order to get back to where we need to be.
I think it's important to also note that, building on what Melissa said about how we're not a monolith as a community, our community has also been changing. The population of veterans is declining pretty quickly because the huge cohorts that served as draftees are passing on. And that cohort was predominantly men, by just huge percentage, and predominantly white. The younger generation of veterans, post 9/11 veterans, we are much more diverse in terms of gender and in terms of racial ethnic background. And veterans, our veteran identity is only one part of our broader identity. So if you look at how do veterans tend to vote, if you break it down a little more in a little more nuanced way, they often align with other aspects of their demographics, right? So old white men veterans are going to vote a little bit more like other old white men. And younger veterans are maybe going to be a little more, we are more diverse. And so our alignments can also be a little bit more diverse. You also, if you watch the polling, though, you see that Trump is finally losing his chokehold even on the vote of older folks, as they see what a risk they are facing because of his failure to control the coronavirus pandemic. Also, polling within the military shows that his support among active duty personnel has been slipping. I think that folks who serve in the military, and particularly on the officer side, are aware of how unstable his leadership style has been and the risks that we're facing in terms of our international alliances and the engagements that we may or may not be dragged into abroad because of his erratic style and decision-making process, such as it is. We also see, as Melissa said, that he's made some decisions that negatively impact the military quite directly, such as the trans ban. And beyond just the trans ban, he's also made some really negative comments about those who serve and those who have made the ultimate sacrifice, reportedly calling us losers and suckers for wearing the uniform and being willing to give our lives in service of our nation. That concept of service and sacrifice and honor is completely foreign to him. And I think that news is starting to trickle into some segments of the military and veteran populations.
Kayla, that's a really important point that you make, bringing in the Atlantic article. Because that reporting, right, obviously, I mean, as a veteran and knowing the two of you as connected as you are with, you know, the veteran population, how did that article resonate among families and among veterans? I mean, is it something that really changed people's opinions and their minds? Can you speak to that, Kayla?
My personal opinion is that if somebody is a true believer, if they have completely drunk the Kool-Aid, it's not going to register. They won't believe it, and it won't change their minds. But folks who may have been questioning before, may have had some doubts, I think will be swayed to think a little bit more deeply. I mean, look, we've known from the time that he was still campaigning that he had no respect for service based on his comments about John McCain, his comments about the Khan family. Trump has never demonstrated genuine respect or understanding for those who serve or the sacrifices that their families made. People who were blind to that and refused to see it at the beginning, I don't think are going to suddenly start to see it, but I think it could definitely sway some folks who maybe had some uncertainty already.
I tend to agree with Kayla in that I don't think it's swayed too many who are diehards at this point. For whatever reason, they don't recognize that they have been pawns for Trump. He loves to wave an American flag. If you remember when he came in to office, it was all about my generals, until, well, frankly, his generals finally stood up and walked out on him. And so then it, became essentially a war on officers. As a former officer, I definitely felt that, a war on the intellectual side of the military. He stokes division within the junior enlisted ranks, especially. He knows those pain points to hit. And so he doesn't respect us. We're pawns. We are foot soldiers for a racist agenda. For those who still kind of follow suit with some of his ideals. And as you opened up the segment with Lindsey at the beginning, I think what really crystallized for the folks who did understand the Atlantic article and did take it to heart, we knew when we saw what happened outside Lafayette Square. We knew when we saw the misuse of federalized troops. Look, I couldn't walk around downtown Baghdad without name tapes on and without, identifying myself. So who are these random, police that have been directed by the Attorney General out here in Washington, D.C., talking, or rather, harassing, I should say, the civilian population, which also further degrades the civ-mil divide, which we talk about quite a bit within our community. And so there's so many problematic things. Like, I'm getting tongue-tied just even trying to get it all out. But I tend to agree in that the Atlantic article, it didn't sway too many opinions. There may be one or two moderates who were impacted by it or took offense to it, but we've known. We've known all along.
I also think that seeing it in print that bluntly really activated folks who already thought that he disliked and sneered at the military. Those folks came out ready to vote.
Yeah. Absolutely. I could say anecdotally, I definitely saw some folks who said, all right, now I'm fighting mad.
Yeah, same.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that the three of us have talked about this several times outside of the show. And I really saw it resonate with families that would consider themselves very patriotic, right? Or lived in areas around a large military base, that their business actively supports the military, their community work actively supports the military. And, I know I talked to both of you about seeing how it resonated in areas around Fort Hood, Texas, because I started getting messages from people couldn't believe this, right? And it's hard not to respond and say, how did you not believe this? But, it is interesting to see how it is resonating with people. And I think that too, while, you never know what's going to stick, right? Maybe it has been something that folks have stopped and taken a second look at whether or not this is really the country in which, they feel as if that represents their values, right? And
yeah, that's a very fair and astute observation, Lindsey, especially as you bring up Fort Hood, because again, Fort Hood has been the epicenter of all things wrong in the military in 2020. Upwards of 30 deaths that were ruled suspicious in some way, and this is aside from Specialist Vanessa Guillen, Elder Fernandez, so many others I can't even begin to name. And the command has been under intense scrutiny, as they should be, as has been the Army and DOD at large out of this. And so I think you're right in that the military families are the ones who probably did maybe have a few changed opinions there. Because if you're in a military or you're a veteran and you felt a certain way about Trump, you're generally speaking in one camp or another. There wasn't a whole lot of gray area in there. For families who look to their family members who have served with respect and reverence and look to their communities with respect and reverence, they were probably insulted more for us. I think we're just used to taking the crap. And so they were, I feel like they were, they took umbrage for us. And it may have actually turned a few voters in that direction.
I think at this point, we will take whatever resonates, right, with voters and ensuring that people go to the polls, in November, but also ensuring that they make a educated vote about who they choose to lead our country. Because as the two of you have laid out beautifully, as I said before, so much is at stake, including our entire democracy. So it is so important. I want to talk a little bit, as we mentioned at the top of this segment, the two of you are involved in the Women Veterans Council. Talk a little bit about some of the issues, and I know in the second segment we're going to really get into it, but Kayla, can you give us an overview of some of the top issues that are really important to women veterans this year in particular?
Women veterans face the same challenges that veterans face and the same challenges that women face. So the issues that are going to be really particularly important to us are things like access to healthcare, but also right now, what's happening with our children, what's happening with our jobs. We've seen that during this pandemic, mothers in particular have been forced out of the workforce like no other group. And so women veterans who are moms, that's going to be a top concern for us as well. And we know that military sexual trauma is a significant issue. I think we're going to spend more time talking about that in the next segment. But that is one, as Melissa pointed out, that, you know, the military has once again had its Me Too moment. And that is at the top of many women veterans' minds this year in a way that that it has never been this strongly in the forefront in the past.
Well, it is so important that we're having these conversations right now, and it just underlines the important work that the two of you are doing. As we kind of roll into a break here, Melissa, can you just lay out for us the importance of voting? Because we have made a commitment on this show to remind people time and time again the importance of voting. And I know we'll do it in the next segment too, but as we go to break, can you take us through that and really talk about the importance of voting?
Sure. If you could give me a little bit of latitude, I can do that with a great story, actually. Picture it, 2004, Philadelphia. I'm there at the dining room table with my entire family. This was around Thanksgiving time. And we had a cousin who did not vote. This is after the 2004 election. My family is a proud Black family. I am a third generation combat veteran. My grandfather was killed in action in World War II. My father served in Vietnam and served for 27 years after that. He actually commissioned me. So we fought for this. Like, we know we fought for this. We fought for it as women. We fought for it as Black women. We fought for it as a Black family. So when this cousin says that he didn't vote at Thanksgiving 2004, all hell broke loose at our family table. And it was a tag team between myself, my uncles, my aunts, my father, my grandmother, all joining in. And suffice to say, I don't think he's missed an election since then. But voting is oh so important. And especially if you come from a marginalized community. I mean, we've been speaking about the intersectionality of things, in terms of that obviously grounds everything that I look at. My worldview comes from that standpoint. You can't, it's gone even beyond from, the 90s when we had to rock the vote, or when you go into, you can't complain if you don't vote, or don't boo vote. It's just more than just, the platitudes that have been said about voting. We're seeing existential threat right now to many communities across our country. And that's why it's so important for us to get out the vote in this last stretch before the election.
Well, thank you. Please stay with us. We will be right back.
Our fight against coronavirus isn't over. Let's wear face masks in public. Stay 6 feet or more from others. Follow state and local guidelines. And wash our hands frequently. Let's move forward together. Learn more at coronavirus.gov.
America, land of the free. It's at the core of who we are. Freedom. The freedom to live without fear, to drive through all 50 states, to sleep safely in our own beds, the freedom to jog where we please, to watch birds in the park, to wear a hoodie, the freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because no matter your religion, gender, disability, age, race, all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
This is where you rise, this is where you shine, this is where you become the greatest of all time. History in the making. This is history in the making. History in the making.
Vote for your life.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. We're continuing our conversation this evening with Melissa Bryant, U.S. Army veteran and advocate, and Kayla Williams, U.S. Army veteran and author. Thank you again for being with us. And Melissa, as we finish the first segment, you told an incredible story about the importance of voting. And I know we're going to continue to talk about voting and making sure that people can get to the polls in November, because so much is at stake. And I want to talk a little bit about what is at stake. The two of you participated in an event on September 30th to honor the legacy of Vanessa Guillen. Melissa, can you talk a little bit about that for our viewers that aren't familiar with that story and what happened at Fort Hood, Texas? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Vanessa Guillen was PFC. She was posthumously promoted to specialist E4. She went missing in April of this year. And after an exhaustive search by her family and Spanish language media, celebrities such as Salma Hayek, recording artist Chala, and others who were calling awareness to her turning up missing at Fort Hood, her remains were sadly found on 4th of July weekend, July 2nd. And it dealt such a crushing blow to advocates like Kayla and myself and so many others who have heard this story all too often. The details of her murder are especially tragic. And really what was the crux of it is that she feared retaliation. She reported to her family that she was being sexually harassed by a superior, and that she was afraid to report it because she thought she would be retaliated against. This is something that Kayla and I have spoken out on for years. And there have been many women who've been in this fight for decades. Let's go back to Tailhook, for those who may not remember, from 1991. So we're still talking about sexual harassment, and it builds from there. Sexual harassment is the permissive environment. That's the lewd comments, the jokes, the things that we kind of just brush off, the comments about our physique. And then it goes from there into an environment of where, oh, well, it's okay to grab someone's rear end or grope someone's breasts or anything like that. And then from there, it turns into full-on sexual assault, i.e. rape. And sadly, maybe worse. And Vanessa paid for it with her life. Advocates across the country, we had a Zoom call on July 2nd, and there was about 30 of us on that call. And it started off as a cathartic outpouring of all of our collective trauma, because we're all MST survivors in some fashion. And then we turned that rage into action. And we drafted a petition that had over 4,000 vetted signatures of servicewomen and veterans. We went forward and demanded of Congress a hearing and a congressional investigation on the ground of what was happening, which Congresswoman Jackie Speer of California led last month. She led a CODEL down at Fort Hood to see what was happening down there. And so much has happened. We now have a bill even that's out, the I Am Vanessa Guillen bill, which is a combination of several comprehensive actions that we've tried to put forth into legislation over the last better part of a decade. And now that's moving forward, and we're pushing for that to be passed into law. So we've had a groundswell of momentum coming out of this. And it all was born out of a hashtag, I Am Vanessa Guillen, where servicewomen took to Twitter and to Facebook and to other social media and started telling their stories. And I can tell you, it's been amazing in discussing this, especially with civilian women who have never understood, or maybe are just now learning, the plight of military women when we navigate this male-dominated space, and how we can fight with the guys, but then sometimes we're fighting against our own brothers in arms.
Kayla, can you speak to this a little bit? Because Melissa, you brought up a really good point that many civilian women are really just learning about this issue and this horrific problem. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Kayla? Because I think as this issue becomes more and more a part of the discussion and mainstream discussion, these statistics and this understanding is critically important to ensure that we can get the changes made that need to be made. Kayla, can you speak to that?
Sure, absolutely. And I do feel sometimes as if it's a bit of Groundhog Day, because the number of times that I've heard, well, this is the year that people are going to pay attention to the sexual harassment and sexual assault of women in the military, is getting a little tiresome. When the Invisible War came out, there was a groundswell of attention. When the Marines United scandal of Marine men primarily sharing photos of Marine women that they should not have shared in compromising positions, it's going to get everybody's attention. We're finally going to do something. And now here we are again. I am hopeful, cautiously optimistic, that this time is a little bit different, because we've also seen a change in the civilian sector. The Me Too movement has started to dramatically change the conversation throughout American society, with women everywhere standing up and saying, it's happened to me and it's not okay, and it's not going to happen to my daughters, it's not going to happen to my sisters, it's not going to happen to any other women again. We're fed up, we're tired of it, and we're going to take action. And we're seeing that within the military as well, where women in the military are speaking out in the aftermath of Vanessa's murder in a way that is a little unprecedented. We've heard about it before. We've heard isolated women speaking up, but this groundswell has been significant. The numbers of stories being shared and the numbers of women who are finally willing to speak up and shed their shame and realize that it's not them, that it's a system that is failing them, failing to protect them after seeing warning signs for many, many years. We know that about 1 in 4 women in the military are sexually harassed on an annual basis, so report past year sexual harassment, and about 6% of women report past year sexual assault. Military women report past year sexual assault. One of the things that I've been really concerned about is that since 2012, we had seen a bit of a downward trend. We saw a decline from 2014 to 2016 that was pretty encouraging, after a decline from 2012 to 2014. But then in 2018, the numbers jumped back up to the 2012 rates or slightly higher. And to be honest, if I look and think what is the biggest, most significant factor, what happened, it's that the commander-in-chief of the United States military bragged about grabbing women by the pussy and tweeted that, what did you expect when you put men and women together in the military? When he commenting on the large number of sexual assaults that happened in the military, he said, what do you expect when you put men and women together? To have that messaging from the commander-in-chief that men can do whatever they want and that they're expected to, that they can't be expected to control themselves. First, I believe that's incredibly sexist to argue that men are incapable of controlling themselves. I do not believe that for a second. I'm married to a man. I am completely confident that is able to control his own body and his own mind. And I'm confident that all men are able to, if their leadership is sending clear and compelling messages about what is and is not acceptable. We know that rates of other crimes committed by military members are a tiny fraction of those committed by civilians. Rates of drug use, for example, much lower in the military. Rates of robbery committed by active military personnel, much lower than by civilians. So why is this one crime being committed at similar rates? Well, I think it's because the chain of command is not taking it seriously enough and is not sending the consistent message that it will not be tolerated, that people will be punished, and that women will be believed. I say women, although I must acknowledge, and I'm so sorry to any men for not acknowledging, this does happen to men as well, of course. Statistically speaking, it's much more likely to happen to women, but anyone can be a survivor of sexual harassment and assault, and we must stamp it out with firm, vigorous leadership that respects the experiences of everyone and holds people truly accountable. This is why I am so convinced that we must elect a Biden-Harris administration. Joe Biden was one of the original backers of the Violence Against Women Act. He has been a strong ally in recognizing how significant a problem violence against women is and being willing to speak up and try to find legislation and other ways to act against it. And Kamala Harris is a former prosecutor who has prosecuted sex crimes. These leaders will take it seriously and will insist that it be taken seriously throughout the military, throughout the entire chain of command. And that is just one of the many reasons that I am out there campaigning for and really backing Biden-Harris this year.
Absolutely. And Kayla, I mean, you brought up all these amazing points with it, and I'd be remiss if I don't bring up the fact that people say, well, the Guinan family visited Trump and he promised to do something. No. He took a photo op, and he took a photo op with an incredibly vulnerable family as well, because Vanessa Guillen was also first generation American. And she joined, and so many other Latina and Latino service members joined because they're told that this is a pathway to citizenship if they're not already citizens or naturalized, or it's a way in which they can bring in their families and allow for family citizenship. And the things that we tell recruiters when they prey upon Latino recruits, sometimes it can be just downright false in a lot of the advertising and the bill of goods that they sell folks. And again, it's another way in which Trump uses us as props and pawns, but doesn't actually do anything. Because I mentioned legislation that Congress is pushing forward now, particularly out of the Democratic caucus, but you're not seeing, Trump necessarily, say, oh, I'm going to do something about it, or I'm going to force anything. You are the executive. You control the Department of Defense. What are you doing about your own department? So it's important to note that just because you see him with a photo op with troops, or you see him in a photo op with the Guillen family, doesn't mean that anything's actually happening in terms of fixing this systemically. On September 30th, also, as you brought up, that would have been her 21st birthday. That would have been Vanessa's 21st birthday. She was taken from us before she'd even legally take a drink, and yet she was serving. And in San Antonio and in Houston, her hometown, and all over Texas, there were vigils and marches that were held commemorating her service. And also, we now have shifted in talking about the Vanessa Guillen legacy. And her legacy will be, to Kayla's point, we've heard year after year after year that now this is the year. But now women have dug in and said, this is for certain the year, and we're not going to let it go. God forbid Trump get another 4 years as commander in chief. You're going to have an army of women to deal with, literally and figuratively, and especially surrounding MST, should he be reelected. But I don't want to put that evil into the universe. So I'm going to just stop.
I think this, as you said, Melissa and Kayla both, this is really an issue where all women can come together on it. And I mean, I remember for me personally, why I fell to my knees the day after the election in 2016 was as a mother of 2 little girls and as a woman who had been assaulted. We had just elected a man who openly bragged about sexually assaulting women. And whether it happens in the military, whether it happens on the streets of our community, this is an issue where every woman should come together and ensure that we feel safe, that we feel confident, that we are able to lead productive lives in a way, like you said, where men respect who we are as human beings and what we contribute. And I think that is so key. And this is one of those issues that I think there is no divide, right? Civilian women, women who served in the military, all need to come together on this issue, because we do have a commander in chief right now who openly bragged about sexually assaulting women. And it's disgraceful. And it is not the example that I know we want to set for our daughters in this country and even for our sons in this country. So thank you both for your work on that issue. It is so critically important. And unfortunately, we have a lot of work to do on that issue. Can you tell us a little bit? Because, Melissa, you brought up that, obviously the idea that Trump hasn't done enough, right? And setting the example that he does. But there were so many Republicans who stood in the way of reauthorizing the End Violence Against Women Act, right? There are so many Republicans who thought that wasn't important. So the example that not only is being set in the White House, but examples are being set across this country and Republican leadership that is telling our young girls that you are less than, that you are not important, and telling women of this country the same thing. Melissa, can you talk a little bit about ensuring that, yes, we keep this administration accountable for those things, but we also need to keep our federal leaders, our state leaders, and our local leaders accountable to these policies?
Absolutely. First of all, Mitch McConnell has been holding up the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act for this session, and it's been disgusting, frankly, to watch something that has been an issue of law, or rather law of the land for 26 years, to not be reauthorized. I had the pleasure of speaking on the anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act enactment, which Joe Biden pushed for as a senator. I spoke at a discussion with Dr. Jill Biden about this, and Simone Sanders and some other surrogates within the campaign. And in speaking about the pain that women have collectively felt over the last few decades, and having that meaningful legislation, and to all see it come to a grinding halt because of, frankly, one man and his henchmen. This is why we need to vote down ballot. It's not just about the presidential election. This is about the Senate. This is about flipping the Senate, frankly. Honestly, at this point, if you are complicit with the Donald Trump administration, then you should be out of office as well. And it's not just about those who are in the executive. It is about those who are our representatives in Congress. You have a woman veteran fighting against Mitch McConnell right now, Amy McGrath. And so there's, fierce women who are fighting out there, who are, saying that we're not going to take this anymore. But it sometimes feels as if the patriarchy has such a grasp on, what we can do with our bodies and where we can permissibly move without having violence threatened against our bodies. It oftentimes feels insurmountable. And that's why I believe in what you just said, Lindsey, is that every woman should be able to come to the table and recognize the Violence Against Women's Act needs to be reauthorized. We need to push for meaningful legislation, finally, regarding military sexual trauma. All of these issues require a commander-in-chief who sets the command climate from the top and says that these actions will have repercussions and consequences. And we need to ensure that we're teaching that message to our military and our civilian women alike, and to our little girls. My 7-year-old little girl watches me on TV when I talk about these things, and she doesn't quite understand the nuance. She just, sees me putting on my makeup and things. But I often keep in the back of my mind what she's going to see 20 years from now, and what she's going to stand for 20 years from now. And also, to your earlier point of our sons too, my 2 boys, they need to also recognize what is tolerable and what is intolerable within society. That starts at the top. It starts within the Senate. We've got to get these men who are either overtly sexist and openly speak to sexual assault, as our commander-in-chief has, as well as those who are complicit in his actions. You can't just hold your nose and say, well, that's, something odious that Trump said today. No, you're being complicit and you're enabling it further, and we're not doing enough to enforce even what's already in the law by following what Trump says.
I think it's been really fascinating to see the reaction to women's political rise. I think you made such an excellent point that the down ballot races are incredibly important, and it's time for us to push even harder for greater equality in terms of our representation in the House, in the Senate, and in state legislatures across the country. But look at the reaction that some women have been facing when they have gotten elected office. The lack of respect, the language used against, for example, AOC, and the language used against Kamala after the debate she had the other day. I mean, just astonishing to hear what people believe is acceptable to say out loud on camera about women who are sitting members of the House of Representatives, who are sitting senators. It's just astonishing to see that lack of respect, often from people who might pretend that they do respect women, right? Mike Pence, who famously won't dine with a woman who isn't his wife alone, probably would claim that he respects women. But that policy and others show, in fact, a deep lack of respect for women as professionals, as individuals, and as human beings. And that's why we have to fight so hard for women's political power and our economic power, our equal representation. We need to make sure that when the Biden administration is in charge, that he's appointing women to senior positions in government too, because that has been abysmal under the current administration too.
It really has. And, I think this issue is one of the many issues, right, that is essentially on the ballot in November. I have heard, whether it's, because of the global pandemic that we're in, the lack of leadership we have at the top, Trump's ability to put doubt into our democracy and our right to vote. So many people have talked about whether or not their vote will count. Melissa, talk a little bit about that, because that is so alarming that, one, we're even having this conversation, right? We're the United States of America and we're having this conversation. The two of you have served to protect our right to vote. And I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on that. Melissa, will you start us off?
I started with my family story of why it's personally important, but it's important for the audience to recognize that within marginalized communities, they've often felt that their voice didn't matter and that their votes did not matter. This is especially true of Black and Brown communities, and that historically they felt as though it doesn't matter. And this comes from a very real history of it not mattering, and there being I spoke to my family literally fighting for the right to vote. I mean, this even goes back to Jim Crow. This goes back to the days of poll taxes. And so one of the things that I know within a subset of the population that I'm passionate about, and then I pursue also, is pushing for the Black and Brown vote and for the previously disenfranchised vote. For those to recognize that, yes, that was the history of this country. We've come a very long way, and don't squander that. Let's not squander the successes that our grandfathers, our grandmothers, our mothers and fathers have fought for. One thing I think is encouraging is the young vote. And I just was reading this morning of how the 2016 early voting tally was at somewhere around 500,000 around this time of year. And for now, this year, we're at 6.8 million votes that have been cast so far for early voting. So that's another thing I think that has really changed, is that people are embracing early voting, mail-in voting. If you're military, you've been doing mail-in voting for years. We've been doing it since the Civil War. So we can, it works, trust us, no matter what Trump does to gut out the postal office, or postal service rather. And we just need to continue to keep talking to a lot of those first-time voters who have become completely distrustful of their government. When I say first-time voters, I'm not necessarily referring about Gen Z. I'm talking about a lot of folks who have just sat on the sidelines and have just been so disgusted with their government that they've never felt compelled to vote. And I think that is something where I, at least personally, have seen the tide turning, because people realizing that this is an election for the ages. We're going to be talking about the 2020 election for the next 100 years. And I think that the general population is finally coming to terms with that and acting accordingly.
And it is so important. We know that the 2016 election came down to a relatively small number of votes because of the quirks of the Electoral College. It was not a large number of people who turned the tide in 2016. And so every single vote matters tremendously in 2020. Every single person needs to get out there and cast their ballot in whatever way is safest and most comfortable for them. I am a Virginia resident. I live here in Virginia, and I have already returned my mail-in ballot. One thing I thought was really cool is that there is a system online where you can track your ballot if you use the mail. I logged in every day and saw, oh, it's been mailed to me, and it shows up in my house. And then I filled it out, had my husband witness, sign as a witness. I've read the instructions 15 times very carefully, did not want to make a mistake, have my witness, use the double envelopes, all of the things, put it back in the mail, go back on, and it shows that it's moving through the mail again. And when they expect it to be received at the office, and then it shows up with the big green check. Yep, they got my ballot. So I feel really confident knowing that my ballot was received, and that because I sent it in really early, if they find any kind of problem with it, there's plenty of time for them to get back to me and tell me I need to do my ballot again. And if you use that system, you follow it, you track it all the way through, if it's not received on time, you can go and vote in person, make sure you tell them what's happened, cast your provisional ballot. I think it's so important for all your viewers to know and understand, Lindsey, that there are so many checks and balances in place. They are comparing signatures, they're comparing addresses. When they get mail-in ballots, nobody's voting fraudulently. There are systems in place to prevent that from happening. If my ballot had gone to my old address and whoever lives there now had tried to illegally vote, when it was received, the signature wouldn't have matched. It would have been tossed. If I had tried to go vote in person, now that I've already sent in my mail-in ballot, that's going to be caught. It's going to show that I've already voted. I trust the system. I trust that the people who are there every day making sure that it works are doing what's right for our democracy because they believe in democracy. I've talked to folks who are, who are taking part in this opening and counting of mail-in ballots in Maryland. One of my friends is doing it. They're doing it in pairs. There's a Republican and a Democrat, or a Republican and an independent. There's these careful, incredibly careful systems to make sure every step of the way that every vote that's been cast is a legitimate ballot and that it's counted and recorded accurately. We have to ignore the purposeful disinformation that's being sowed to try to make us doubt our democracy, and remember that the system works, that we must vote, and that every single vote is incredibly important. So request your ballot, vote early, vote in whatever way is safest for you, and then track and make sure that your vote has been counted, because this year it is all on the line.
It is, and that is a great point to end on. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Kayla, for joining us this evening. Thank you all, and good night.